What we're doing is we're going live. That's what we're doing.
Where is it live?
Hello, wake up.
Is
We're
it live?
here. Everybody's here.
Are we doing it live?
We're live.
Yeah, we are live.
Okay.
Okay.
But are you alive? That's the key question.
Oh, are we?
All right.
Okay.
We're live.
Okay.
We're live.
See, Rich was asking the same question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Smooth start.
What do you start?
Well, you didn't welcome
No, you just-
everybody.
you
What
need
are
to-
we?
You need to start it.
Oh,
Welcome
sorry.
to.
Hello, friends of .NET. We are now live, in case you didn't notice this. Welcome to our, 26th community stand-up for language and runtime.
It is not the 26th.
No, it's probably like the 5th or something.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, you're an order of magnitude off.
That's my life, man. I live with data.
Don't we all?
Okay, introduce yourself, Philip, while you're at it.
My name's Philip Carter, and I work on languages, F#, some C# stuff, but usually mostly F#, which I'm happy about.
I'm Kathleen Dollard. I work on the .NET SDK and CLI, and also the languages, managed languages team, C# and Visual Basic. Particularly, I'm the PM of Visual Basic.
Oh, shit.
Sorry. It's fine. You can also go first.
Sorry. For some reason, I thought you'd gone already.
Are we live?
No, you go. Sorry.
No worries. So I'm Landroth. I'm a PM of the .NET Core team. And if I'm not messing up the community stand-up, I work on the API story that we have and the class library experience.
Mm-hmm. You review APIs for a living. That's what you just wrote
That's
on
what I said
Twitter.
yesterday. And sometimes I cry in a corner when that happens.
Yeah. It's way closer to the truth than otherwise. Rich Lander, I work on the .NET Runtime and other things.
And in your spare time, you improve footers of websites.
Yes, yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Sorry, footers?
Yeah, footers.
See, I'm not even awake yet.
You said footers.
Yeah, there's one of the things about moving to America is like we just say routers, and some people here actually say routers.
Routers.
Yeah, it's like okay.
How rude.
It's like I don't think that's a thing. Okay.
All right.
Gee, this was the roughest start we ever had, but it's good. I'm laughing. That's
Pull this mic
hopefully
down so
our
it's
audience
just
is
not
equally entertained.
Comically.
Yeah, mine is like.
We got one comment from "I'm not myself." Now that's a philosophical statement right there.
Yeah,
I think you
hello,
need
everyone.
Coffee for that.
Hello to you.
So how I start, and then other people can chime in because I don't think I can keep it together for that long.
He must not having his best day ever. I'm just going to mention that.
So, as probably some of you have heard, we do a new JSON API in .NET Core 3.0. And as it is with APIs, it's always good to actually get somebody to try them and give us feedback. And we have done usability studies, I think, last time on the team a long time ago. Like, before I joined, I read a book written by somebody on the team that extensively talked about the usability experience that they had in the 2005 timeframe. And they did the first usability study on their File.io APIs. And I think Brad had this nice comment where he said, the first time somebody tries your API and fails, you think, what a moron.
Yeah.
Then you have the second person walking, you're like, gee, did we only get morons? And then by the third or fifth person, you're like, maybe it's not the person, maybe it's my API. And by the 10th person failing, you're like, it's definitely the API. Or why are we such a bunch of morons? And so basically what they had is they tried for 10 people to use the File.io APIs to read files, and 10 out of 10 people failed within half an hour to manage to open a text file. So pretty bad. And so we didn't want this experience. So we did the same thing with system.docs.json. And I published the results that we had. So in a nutshell, we gave them 5 tasks. So basically serialize and pretty print, deserialize with training commas. We did some sort of pass that we said, okay, what are common error cases people will likely hit? And we basically weave them into the experience to make sure that people, hit error cases we think are common and whether they can actually recover from them. Is the exception message understandable? Is this actionable and all of that?
So just one question.
Yeah.
So I see linked to code. Is that the correct code, like the code that you wanted them to write?
No, this is literally so what we did is we basically gave them effectively a solution with the scenarios. And so this is what they would find. And so the idea is that they have to fill in the blanks. And so you basically people get an idea of what the setup was, right?
Got it.
The correct code for the most part is like 1 or 2 liners. We did not ask them to write pages of code. It's fascinating though. We do APIs for a living, right? So we have done a few APIs and we felt pretty good about our API. One of the major feedback that we got was that one of our key APIs, like the JSON serializer class, has methods to serialize and deserialize, but pretty much everybody failed to find the methods on first attempt. And that was because our methods were not named serialize and deserialize for good reasons, we thought. But we named them read, write, or parse, depending on the payload. And that did not go well. So that's one of the things that we had to change. So that's another example where you're like, that is probably problematic. But so the way we do these studies is that we basically form a bunch of hypotheses, like as in like, here's what we expect to see. And then, in the study, you actually find out whether that's true or not. I mean, clearly for APIs, one of the key, unstated hypotheses is people are able to use your APIs, right? But usually there's more depth to it, like, okay, how would we use the APIs? Will they be easy to use? Will they be hard to use? Are they able to complete the tasks at all? And so we had a bit more details here on like what we think people will be able to do and what they will not be able to do. The other thing that's interesting is usually we get external people to do the studies, but we ran short on time, so we recruited internal people to do the study, which sounds really bad, but given the size of our team, I shouldn't be surprised that we have, we found a bunch of people who never used the JSON APIs in the first place. So they were, as good as any other external person would have been.
So just one question. So here you're saying like, let's look at hypothesis 2, which is completed task 1 to 4 successfully.
Yeah.
So there it says validated. So my expectation from this write-up is that, like, other than number 5, the whole thing was successful.
Yes. And 5, like, we didn't expect people to complete 5 for 2 reasons. One of them, we kind of expected everybody has time for 5 left in the 60 minutes. But the other thing is 5 is one of those examples where I think I have some detail maybe down, because it's significantly different from how JSON.NET works. And that was for good reason. So we thought the people that will manage to get 5, how did they think about it? And I'm not sure I actually linked it below, but all the people that actually started 5 were able to complete 5. And so in that sense, the hypothesis that we had, which we never stated, I guess, was that we didn't expect people to be successful with 5 at all, and that was invalidated. So they actually managed to do 5 as well.
What does partially validated mean?
So that means like you find some people, basically it's a 50-50 split almost, where you say some people are planning on using it, some are not.
So then it's also partially invalidated.
Yeah, so wouldn't neutral be...
Or inconclusive?
That's actually a good point. I mean, I just picked up the wording from someone.
Emo lies.
I lie with data. Yeah, that's fair. The other thing that is interesting, if you read through this, like, I found that apparently people didn't know, or most people didn't know, that actually no, not that one. Do we have to zoom in? No, we don't have zoom in installed. Basically, when you hit F1 in the IDE and you carry this on top of an API, MSDN opens, or the new docs page opens with documentation for the API. And I think half the people in the study didn't know that. And when I tweeted it, a lot of people clearly didn't know that either, which I find surprising because that's literally one of the oldest features that VS has.
And it way predates VS. I mean, I think that it may not go all the way back to WordPerfect and DOS days, but it goes back a long way in a whole lot of different tools. So try it in Word. I mean, it works on a lot of things. Yeah,
and I mean, to me, the surprising thing is why people didn't know that. I mean, maybe we broke it at some point, but
well, I'm going to say this as politically nicely as I can. Maybe for a while, when you hit F1, the docs that you went to weren't all that great. Today, they're really good, but maybe for a while, they weren't very good. For a while back there, before we have our new docs, which are brilliant.
Well, I mean, that might be true too. I think there was actually a period where F1 was literally broken. If you hit F1, you just went to a generic, this is the Visual Studio Code Editor doc page. And then I think there was a transition from MSDN to docs when they didn't have the right hookup.
Yeah.
All right.
I will say I'm a huge F12 user.
That's what you want,
awesome.
Yeah.
The one thing, we're having a side conversation right now on for source-linked libraries, sometimes you still just want that metadata view because it's, terse, but sometimes you would just like to see the source. And so how do we enable that? For the folks at home, if anyone would like to have F12 or say Control F12 show,
or Control click,
yes, or something show source, please tell us.
Yeah. So that was that. The other thing I did yesterday was I pulled some new stats. So basically, we are tracking how many people are moving the NuGet packages to .NET Standard, and we have done this pretty much since the release of 2.0, I believe. And so we pulled the latest data, and so in the top 1,000, for example, we pretty much are at 47% now. And so if you apply a very generous trend line and you extrapolate from there, like, you know, about 2 to 3 years out, is when everybody will, in the top 1,000, have a .NET Standard package. And for the long tail, it's very similar, except there is more like if a, you know, power curve kind of thing going, because it's this long tail phenomenon. But, you know, same there, like we have, I think at this point, what was the number? I think 30% I said. Yeah, I think 30% of all the packages on NuGet.org offer .NET Standard assets. I don't think it's realistic to expect we will ever get to 100% because some packages are just no longer updated, right? They're just done.
Or can't be moved to .NET Standard.
Or can't be, right? I think when we looked at the data, it was like 70% can be. I think that's roughly where it was. And so that's, I think, what I would expect to happen. So, but it's the same thing, like about 2 years out before that's actually is.
And when you say can be, you mean can be without changes, right?
Well, it can be as in, like, if you have a user control library, right? It's not like you can change it to make it .NET Standard. You just fundamentally can't.
Okay.
It just makes no sense, right? Or there are also some packages that are just abandoned, right? Where you could, but the person decided to move on to JavaScript.
I think the answer to your question, which Emo didn't really answer, is yes. For the ones that are candidates,
right?
Kathleen's asking.
Is that 70% just ones that you could just kind of do it without too? Is that just ones that have something deep fundamentally that have to change, or just things that would just need a little bit of changes? And it sounds like you did the work to have it be things that are fairly fundamental.
Yeah. So the 70% number comes from us basically looking at what APIs the package is using. So they only use APIs .NET Standard has. Yeah. So that means they would only have to change their project file effectively to spit out a .NET Standard binary. Okay. So that would be the only change that we have to do.
That's awesome.
All right, so
if there's someone who is in the remaining 53% of the top 1,000, and they're not, for the reason is they're confused or don't know what to do, should they just reach out to you on Twitter and ask for help?
That would be one way to do it, yeah. I mean, that certainly gives us the ability to engage with that person. I mean, one of the things that I should point out is that these numbers do not include us. So the top 1,000 excludes all Microsoft.
So third party.
It's only third party. So the top 1,000 is probably more like the top 4,000 realistically, because some of our packages are in the top 1,000. But they will include, I think, Newtonsoft JSON, for example, right? But
not jQuery, which is the number 2 package.
Yeah. jQuery has decided not to move to .NET Standard.
So this count is just .NET people, right? This is just .NET pack. I mean, this is...
well, we are only counting packages that have any sort of assets that are in the lib folder.
Yeah. So I don't think jQuery was there to start with.
Mm-hmm. We should talk to Jake, though, over there.
To Jake Beery. Apparently he's an actor. So... Do you want to talk about this one or any more?
Yeah, there's a couple things coming that are interesting from the SDK CLI perspective, but one of them, I think that the most significant one for people is going to be that we have changes to global.json that are in flight, and you can find this in designs. And I don't know if we've talked about the designs repo here, but we are trying to put as many designs as practical into the open as. Definitely, we do them all as early as practical. When we're just wandering around in the forest trying to figure out what we're going to do, we're probably not going to put that immediately public. But as we get things and we have plans, we want feedback on them. And so the global.json plans is to the big features that people are going to be able to relate to, I think, are that you will be able to specify that you don't want previews. That's been a fairly significant request. You'll also be able to set a floor, which is another request. So, for example, if you know that your package is going to work with an SDK of, let's just say, 2.1.500 or higher, then you can specify that and then specify for it to roll forward. Even across majors, and then you will never be broken by the SDK. And then the last one the last big area that's understandable. This explains the details of how we're accomplishing this, but the last big area is to do exact. And so if you want exactly this, crash if it's not there, then that's one of the things that we're adding to this. And
error, not crash, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's not going to crash your machine or anything, but if you try to run an operation with the SDK and you don't have that SDK, it will not succeed. It will give you an error that says you don't have the right SDK. So there's a couple of caveats on that I think are worth spending a minute or two on. One of which is the process of getting there, and this may I think some of this may have even not been it may have even wound up in the public. But I actually designed this. I'll say because I did most of the work. I designed this 3 times, and the reason was that the first thing I came up with is, let me make it great. Okay, let me do what I think is the greatest thing, and then I had the insight that wasn't what was best for folks, because that means you have a new, which would be in our world at least your 3rd major strategy for how you're going to think about versioning and roll forward and selecting something. So we have NuGet, and then we had the runtime. And initially I thought, well, it's 2nd, and then it was going to be 3rd. And so then I tried to follow NuGet's package structure and how you select in NuGet. And that actually turned out to be both way too complicated and actually not very feasible. And so the 3rd time I picked up on the runtime roll forward, the current runtime roll forward plans. And that's what we're paralleling, which Rich helped to put together. And that's also had a few changes in the .NET Core 3 timeframes. So we didn't get there in a very straightforward manner. There was a lot of work, but at the end, I think we've got the right approach, because it does very closely parallel the runtime stuff, except for one place that it's different, which I just want to remind people about, because I understand that the SDK version numbers are confusing, and I'm sorry. But the first 2 digits, the 2.1, 2.2, 3.0, that is the runtime that you need to have available. And up until 3.0, that's actually, you need that runtime. From 3.0 on, you need like that runtime or higher. We're making some changes around deployment, which I wasn't going to get into today. So the first 2 digits are what runtime you relate to, and the last 2 digits are the patch. So what we call the hundreds position, that's also called the feature band, and that's where you find out the actual version of the SDK that you're running. And so I know that that's a little bit confusing for folks, but that first position of the hundreds number is super important from the point of view of the SDK. And where that confuses people is the current SDK design is that we create a new SDK for every Visual Studio. We roll that forward, and so we have a 2.1.500 that corresponds to a 2.2.100. We have a 2.1.600 that corresponds to a 2.2.200, and I know that is insane, and we are changing that in 3.0. And so good news is just that will clean itself up. So that's sort of that story. I don't know if you want to add anything from the runtime selection perspective.
No, I don't want to say anything about that in particular, but I just have one question.
Yeah, okay.
Which is, can you tell us the rules with global.json from the perspective of, so I know, you're in some particular deep folder structure, and the SDK, or sorry, CLI, knows how to look upwards to its parents and grandparents to find a global.json. What is the behavior when there's multiple of them that have partial data? So for example, imagine like the first one you hit, it just says no previews. And then the next one, if you keep on going up, actually has a version with, say, a floor. What's the behavior?
That is a great question. Thanks for asking, because it's super important that people understand that. So I actually didn't pay you to ask that question, but I'll have to buy you a beer later or something. So
I think you probably owe me a beer for other reasons. So it's just +1 on that count.
+1 on the beers, yeah. So because we are extending the global.json that currently exists, we didn't do a deeper redesign because we wanted to get it out in 3.0. It's very important that we get this into people's hands. We're using the old global.json rules, which means that we stop at the first global.json. So the very first one you hit is the only one that will be used. So if you have behavior higher in your stack, you have to repeat it. And that might be preview versus floor, and it also might be a custom SDK. So there's various reasons you may have a global.json. You need to make sure the first one that gets hit has everything you need in it. And we are batting around the design. We don't have a final design for it yet, but we are hoping to change that in the future. 5.0 or later, in order to make that change, we have to create a new file type, because it'd be a horrible breaking change if we cease to have that behavior within global.json land. So we also get the win of getting to rename it, because global.json is not a name that is terribly descriptive. It doesn't really tell you very much. So we're batting around that, because the other win we'd like to get in doing that is to know where the source root is of the repo. So that would be very helpful for a number of things to work better, particularly around MSBuild. And so we're hoping to kind of kill those in either the 5.0 or somewhat later time frame. So right now, global.json, stop at the first one, make sure it has everything you need to say.
Right. So with that in place, my strategy, so tell me if this makes sense. My strategy for what I would want, so I have a Git folder on my machine. It's on a different place on Windows than Mac, but that doesn't matter. I would probably put a global.json at the root of that folder that says no previews. And then in particular projects, I would either have a global.json that opts me into a preview or opts me into using a specific SDK version, or no global.json, then I would just rely on whether the default is, which would not be previews. Is that
is a great design. That is a very good design. It's up to you which way you want your route to be, whether you want that to be previews on or previews off, and you're having that previews off, and then you're opting in on specific repos, which is great.
Yeah, and this because I've told you this many times, but I think it's worth saying. The reason that I don't want to use previews isn't because I actually don't want the preview CLI, and it isn't because I don't trust it. It's that I want to default to, like right now, I want to default to 2.2 templates often, and not, because I'm always running 3.0 preview 7 daily builds, and then if I build a 3.0 project, then I need to have a NuGet config in that directory, because I can't use nuget.org. Like, it's this kind of fairly horrible horrible experience that I have, because I pretty much never install our stable builds,
right?
Because of the job I have. So that's. But if the latest preview CLI gave me the ability to create 2.2 templates, then I would be super happy.
So template selection is being redesigned right now, and it's partially done. I'm actually not doing that work, so I just can give you the high level on it, which is you'll be able to do that. Unfortunately,
would be so awesome.
The preview that's coming out right now, as part of that work, we took part of it and couldn't take quite all of it. So if you're on the latest preview and you are trying to target 2.2 or 2.1, you definitely are going to have to make sure that you get on the right SDK first. So you're going to have to get a global.json on just to get to the right SDK, and that's dumb, and we're working on it. And I think that we're going to land that in 3.0. It's not landed yet, so I'm not going to make big promises on that. But we know the template selection story is just a total mess across versions, and it's terribly important that we get it fixed, along with some other things that they're working on, like how you update templates, trying to get a better story on that, because some of our templates do have a fairly quick update cycle. So yeah, that's definitely happening.
Awesome.
Okay. Yes. So I have one other thing to talk about, but shall I let Philip go first and then come back to me?
Go for it.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead and
so actually,
chatting.
Emo led into this really well. He was talking about the difficulty with the file system in early versions of .NET when you had to do the stream and all sorts of real nastiness to get it done. It was really horrible.
That.
And one of the things that the VB Runtime did was give you a different option for that. So there was a simple way to read and write files rather early. I don't know if it was in the initial release but by 2005 there was a way that you could do that, and that was in something called the VB Runtime, which is the way VB becomes VB, and that some of the special features are in there. And we're in the process of moving that to .NET Core, and it's a journey. It's not like like, here, there we go, it's all done at once. But we've made some really big strides in this preview, getting that done, the last preview and this preview, and that's pretty much where it's going to be for .NET Core 3.0. But a couple of things I want to shout out to there is that we've had excuse me, some community feedback, which has been contributions, which have been super valuable. So somebody's been helping us with the file system early on. That was several months ago. Worked on that, and then more recently the financial functions. We had somebody from the community port those, and there's still some porting work to be done. If you'd like to be part of that, you can check out on. There's a GitHub repo in CoreFX. So the CoreFX repo has an issue for porting the VB runtime.
Do you want to change the product version selector?
To what?
To .NET Core, maybe?
Yeah, we're just doing that, right? So
yeah, so it's probably not going to be here yet.
I mean,
so yeah,
might be actually.
Yeah.
They might have some of it. Yeah. Well, they'll have some of it
to interrupt. That was just bugging me.
Right. So we're in this process, and it's going to parallel WinForms, and the initial version. For WinForms in 3.0 is going to look C#-like. It's not going to use the Visual Basics Windows application base, I believe is the name of it. That's not going to be in place for 3.0. WinForms is just not ready to be fully usable, so that work is a little behind schedule. Not behind schedule, behind. It's not going to release at the same time. It's going to release at a later point. And so that and the updating the templates to respect the VB way of creating a WinForms file, that's all going to come closer to when we have a WinForms designer and are ready to go with that space.
And this also includes the support for the my keyword in VB, right?
Yeah, so the my keyword is going to come in. My and WinForms are the two things that we haven't ported in this space. We will be porting. The my space is kind of a complex space, and it interacts with a compiler. It's got a really interesting way that it all fits together. Emo looked at it and he goes, wow, that's really interesting. And there were parts of it I actually thought was in tasks and targets that's in the compiler. So we've all been learning actually a lot about some of we've been learning about, not the engineers, about how that works behind the scenes, because like every other Visual Basic programmer on the planet, when I'm doing VB, I just don't think about it. It just works, and that's the heart and soul of Visual Basic. Is that it just works, and we're working on getting back to that in .NET Core. But like I said, it's a journey. It's not something that we're going to just say here 3.0, it's all done. It's not. But we're getting there, and there's really good progress in 3.0. And that's kind of the end of what I came here today with.
Can you respond to that very last comment at 10:24?
There's preview stuff.
The last comment on global.
It's about what you talked about.
I'm a little bit confused by the comment. I'm sorry. Does somebody get the?
I think what he's asking. Sorry, I think what he's asking is if you have a JSON where the preview element is empty and the stable one is empty, it's like open bracket, close bracket. Then he says, then you should check for preview SDKs, and if stable is empty, then go to the global JSON.
Yeah, the problem is that we had a system that where all of the file management, all the file reading, all of that stuff was in place, and in order to get it to fit into this time frame, to get it as quickly as possible, which is 3.0, and not delay it any further, we went with the current rules. We felt like having some rules on the new stuff that were different than rules on the old stuff was going to be. We didn't think that we could explain that very easily. So we wanted the same rules for everything in the file. I agree that would be better behavior. We absolutely want that behavior as quickly as we can get it. But at this point, it's not 3.0. That's going to be post 3.0. But I completely agree that that's the way it should work. You should be able to put preview any place up and down your stack. You should be able to put exact any place up and down your stack. We should even have conversations about how it works if you have something like a floor set, and you have a floor here, and then you have a floor that's lower up above. We have to have conversations about how that should work.
What that means.
There's just a lot of work that needs to be done to get that totally right. The two you're pointing out should definitely work in a way that just, let's just take this one key piece and have it be up and down your stack in a predictable way. And we couldn't get that done alone. We have to wait until we have the larger picture.
And can I get .NET add package -- pre? I think I asked that before.
I would like to give that to you as badly as you, maybe not as badly as you want it, but we are looking forward to being able to do that. The short answer is that, as you might be able to guess, NuGet has a huge number of things that they get asked to do because everybody relies on NuGet and everybody has needs for them. And that requires a change to an API that's not widely used except by the .NET Core CLI. And so sometimes we're fighting for our features features, and right now that's delayed on a NuGet feature. We want it very badly. We want it for tools and for packages, and they will probably come together. But yeah, yes. What can I say? But yes.
So what's this comment? Are there plans to support *** in VS for Mac?
I have no idea.
Whatever it is, I think it's
Probably
like, are you planning on supporting whatever we're talking about?
Peak source
in VS for
definition, like basically everything about navigation and F1 and that sort of stuff. I have no idea F1 works.
I think the way I read it is wildcards in project files. Is that what he's asking for?
So if Code DJ is still on and can tell us exactly what you were trying to ask, we have different interpretations of those stars. At least 3 out of 4 people, maybe 4 out of 4 people.
Is there a 3-letter curse word that might have been leaked out?
I like my IDE shouting back at me when
So obviously there's work going on in VS for Mac. I mean, if that's the question, the answer is yes, there absolutely is. And we have plans for that. We've talked about some of those plans. We'll be looking at moving to support some common infrastructure, more common infrastructure in 5.0 as part of moving to the single.NET. And I think it's easy to predict stuff like, we're going to look at some changes to things like mono MSBuild. Some of that is pretty predictable, some of what we're just looking at right now, but that's still really early.
Okay.
There was something about .NET uninstall. Did you cover that?
Oh, yeah. I can tell you what's coming. This is like out in the future to make everybody happy. We are closing on getting ready to have a .NET uninstall tool as well as we obviously can install. And that's going to actually be a separate download.
Are you sure are you talking about the same thing?
No, that's what that's what he wrote down, but that's not .NET tool. Yeah, we have notes over here. His notes do not talk about what I mean to talk about here, right? So you have SDKs and runtimes, and we had good reasons for this. They just didn't hold up well over time. So we leave a lot of SDKs and runtimes historically on your machine. Just so you know, if you're counting on those, we're making changes gradually to that. Visual Studio 2019 is far more aggressive about cleaning up prior SDKs and runtimes, which is good most of the time. If you have a global.json pointing to something, it might break you, but that's far smaller case than the fact that we have machines out there with a lot of runtimes and SDKs that people just hardly even know they're there. We're working on a tool, hope to get that out maybe even before the next community stand-up, but I want to let people know that's coming. You can certainly use add remove programs today or whatever's right on your operating system, but if you want to delay a little bit, we might be able to make that easier. Because if you have a lot, add remove programs is a real pain in the backside.
Yeah.
Only a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're being sarcastic there.
I'm always the one that ruins everything. So we actually just put out this. Did we? I hope we put out the guidance on when it's safe to use to elevate tools.
Yeah.
And so this tool will have to follow that guidance.
So this is actually not going to be a .NET tool. I just set it as a separate download, and it's actually for really incredibly really that's the reason. .NET tools actually are framework dependent. They're not self-contained, okay? And it turns out that this tool has to be self-contained because otherwise it would try to uninstall itself. And we spent more than one day. We spent some time with the folks working on this trying to figure out an experience that wasn't horrible if it tried to uninstall what it was actually running on. And the bottom line was that we needed to move it into a different delivery mechanism so we could make it self-contained. And once it's self-contained, then when you run it, and then you can just get rid of it after you run it, and you'll be good.
So do you have a plan for what acquisition is going to look like?
Yeah, we're going to put it on a website. And so Rowan, we're working on that with Rowan to put it someplace it'll be near the acquisition story. So that's where we're looking at putting it right now. So if you don't hear from us in the next stand-up, exactly where it is, then it will show up initially as a preview on the same places that you're downloading. So if you use a .NET, download .NET Core, you come to a web page and it will be on that. That's a search string and it works.
Which operating systems?
Initially, it'll be on Windows. We're looking seriously at Mac, and we will not do Linux because Linux has apt-get. We anticipate right now Linux users are pretty much managing the situation. If we hear differently, we'll look at that.
Well, unless it's they're using previews.
So
because we don't have apt-get support for previews.
So that's a really good question. So let me clarify something on Windows. This will only clean up if you use the MSIs to put it, if you did not use an installer to put it on, we're not going to uninstall it through this. And so it would not work with zips and tarballs on any platform. And if you're using previews on Linux, you're in zips and tarballs. We're kind of expecting that if you are doing that, you're probably aware of what's on your machine and you're able to nuke things pretty easily and clean things up pretty well. So it's just that when you use the MSI itself puts some things into your registry and has some extra information so it can do the ref counting and things that the MSI and installers are set up to do for you. So the cleanup is a little bit more than just getting rid of the directories. On Linux, where you don't have that, it is pretty much getting rid of the directories.
Makes sense. So will this also be an MSI? Is that what the...
Yeah, I think that's the explanation. We're still having that conversation, the best way to get on your machine. The nice thing about an MSI is we have a UI that we can put some information for you in, including that it's going to have a slightly unintuitive thing about it that I'm still behind. We forget a lot of information from the preview. We might change this, but actually running the tool will not do anything. It will just tell you what it would do, and then you actually have to put a switch on it that says do it now. I think we're calling it do it actually, but we'll have a switch. And the reason for that is just it is a destructive command. If you have SDKs and you're trying to figure it out and you've just started with this tool, we don't want to uninstall SDKs that you didn't mean to uninstall and make work for you to get your machine set back up again. So the default behavior is actually not going to do anything, and we kind of have to let people know that because it will be a little bit confusing. But if you do without the do it switch, it's going to tell you to add it.
Right, and is the idea that you'll have to run it from an elevated command prompt?
Yes, you will. You'll have to be elevated to do it, and we'll have instructions related to that. And it's one of the reasons that we may do it in an MSI, because we can place it on the machine in a more appropriate location if we do it via an MSI than if we just hand you an executable. So that's the current thinking, is to probably go with an MSI. It's a little more work for us up front, but I think it's going to be good for at least our Windows users and probably Mac users.
But I understand the global tool problem with the framework dependent installation. Do we not have tools that can be self-contained? Is tools always framework dependent?
Right. So .NET Global tools are always framework dependent.
That was my brilliant idea.
Yeah, that's.
I was going to say.
I pushed really hard on that for reasons.
So I think that makes sense for some things, but I wish I would also support when we want to go self-contained for reasons like that.
Well, I think it's one of those kind of like 80-20 rules or 90-10 rules, which is it was much easier for us to do like OS and chip agnostic solution for the first time out. And it aligns with the maximum user value. So we didn't do the niche case.
We might at some future point add that, but we weren't going to hold this feature up in order to add that. So we want to get a better uninstall experience into people's machines, particularly people that have primarily run Visual Studio and have been installing SDKs with Visual Studio and didn't have a good reason to understand that we did leave SDKs on machines so that any global.jsons would not break. I think that at one point when there were a small handful that might have been justified, at this point we clearly need to help customers, particularly those that are running previews, to clean that up. And so this will be, I really like the work that's done on it, and it's far enough along that I know what it's going to look like in most aspects, and I'm pretty happy with the way it's done. You'll be able to have lots of control over what you uninstall. If anything, we put too many switches on it, but it's a rare. You're not going to use it very often, so just plan a little bit of time to figure out the right switches for you.
One more question: are you going to support both 32-bit and 64-bit Windows?
Yes, we are. Absolutely. Okay. So basically. For the runtime versus the SDK, you'll have to specify which one you're trying to get rid of. For 32 and 64, if you don't tell us, we'll assume you meant both.
No, I meant somewhat different question.
All right.
If you're on a 32-bit operating system, will there be an MSI for you?
If not, we should find out why not. I haven't asked that question, but I assume the answer is yes. Okay.
So CodeDJ added that *** was removed in 2019 for Mac. I still don't know what *** is.
I'm sorry. We're going to have to get on one of the other community stand-ups that has better Mac.
Yeah.
VS for Mac.
It's not really this.
On that. I'm afraid that we are just not the folks for that. We could.
Yeah, but I can answer the next question. This is more my bailiwick. which is no, there is no plans to ship the .NET Core runtime with Windows in a way that would be meaningful for developers. There are some Windows teams, like for example PowerShell, that would love to, like the PowerShell team would love to be able to ship PS Core back in Windows, not just PowerShell 5, which would require .NET Core, but it would be done in a way that it's private to PowerShell, and there's definitely no announcement on that. That's just what they would like to do. The reason we're not doing that is just
we learned the hard way.
Well, it's basically this issue of, we ship quite quickly, and so, each Windows would only come with a particular version of .NET Core, which would then eventually become old. And so like .NET Core 3.0, for example, you'd need to ship that yourself on, say, Windows Server 2016, because obviously it wouldn't be there. And also our servicing life cycles are different than Windows. That's the primary issue with the conversation with the PowerShell team, actually.
Wouldn't it, for the rest of Windows, wouldn't it cause quite a bit of problems with the side-by-side story if we were to try to work with Windows? If we were part of Windows, which one would we put in Windows, and how would we maintain it? We were previously single product when we were in Windows.
Right, but that was with .NET Framework. We wouldn't have a side-by-side problem because we would install. Now we're just making stuff up.
Yes, absolutely.
We would just install to the same place that .NET Core is installed today.
Right.
And so we'd retain our side-by-sideness.
Right, but which version would Windows carry? Would it carry all of them, or would it carry?
No, with this imaginary plan,
which doesn't exist and won't exist.
We would ship the latest LTS at that time.
Right, but since Windows focuses on updating existing software as a major thing it's doing, we would also probably have to update every other runtime on the machine.
Yeah, it would get complicated.
It would be crazy.
I would never be in favor of doing
that.
We jumped off some bridges that said, we are definitely having a lot of internal conversations about the fact it's too hard to get the runtime onto the machine, and we want to make people that are creating software and delivering it, we are working on many fronts to make that experience better, including improving this single EXE experience, including looking at some long-term planning on acquisition and how that should happen. Some of that is tied in with other teams inside Microsoft. So we are aware of the fact that this is a problem. This is something that we need to spend some effort on, but it's not going to be sticking the .NET runtime inside of the Windows update.
Well, the other reason is we have avoided doing different things on Windows versus Mac versus Linux.
Right.
So right now we have symmetry across all operating systems, and we think that's a huge benefit.
Although I would push back that Linux is already a little bit different in that. So we have some symmetry, but it's not really complete right now. But yeah.
On the note of we suck, I just noticed that again our comment channel does not connect to YouTube for some reason. So there's a question on YouTube.
No.
I have Preview 6 installed only for Blazor. How can I get the .NET CLI to use RTM runtime by default? With Preview 6 installed, everything defaults to .NET Core 3.0.
Well, isn't that the same?
Blazor's not designed to work with older .NET Core versions than 3.0. So coincidentally, you may find a way to make it work, but I don't think.
So I think he's saying he installed Preview 6 to play with Blazor.
Yeah.
But then outside of Blazor projects, he would like the different .NET CLI, which is I think
And is it the SDK or the runtime he's talking about here?
He talks about the CLI. So
great. Okay, I hadn't heard that the first time out.
So, but by default, if like you have a .NET Core app 2.2 application, meaning that's your project file, and you type .NET Run on that, that should absolutely use the 2.2 runtime.
What? Oh, runtime. Yeah.
Yes. Now, yes, and for the most part, other than this .NET New with templates case, using the later CLI should cause no observable problems.
Right. That is true.
He specifically mentions templates, all that. I suppose templates is the key thing.
Yes, templates is the key thing. Yeah. And that's the thing that bugs me.
Yeah. And in order for us to move away from having all of these different SDKs and this chaos right now we have with SDKs not having linear versioning and all that chaos, to fix that, we are going to be going to a point where we're updating the tip. We'll be encouraging you to use the latest stable to get the latest stable on your machine, then you would use a global.json saying that you wanted previews. You wanted no previews because by default you're going to get previews, and you could opt out with no previews, which you might actually in preview 7. I think that's there in preview 7. It might be preview 8. You will be able to do what you're doing by setting, putting in a global.json with a previews set to. I don't remember the name of the value. Whether it's if you read the field, it'll be obvious whether you set it true or false to get rid of previews.
Yeah. Now this is my time for an old person joke, which is someone says that global.json x86 Cowboy says that it's the new autoexec bat in 2019. I disagree. I think it's the new config.sys.
I was just about to say the same thing.
So I spent so much time editing those files when I was a young teenager. So much time.
Yes. I had like different boot disks for different games with different configurations.
Oh wow. Yeah. I did
I was sick of doing that.
I did a little bit of that kind of thing.
You know, remember high mem versus expanded memory?
Yeah.
Oh, for fuck's sake. I don't want to go back to that.
I used Desk View and Quarterdeck Memory Manager, QEM.
Yeah.
All the good times.
All right. Yeah.
Next to talk about double
Let's
disk.
not
and then
do the Wayback Machine thing.
Okay.
We need a whole different channel for that. We'll do a different show on that.
Okay.
Old people.
Do you want to
Next
talk about the other thing that you did?
Yes. So we had an idea, which was, wouldn't it be good? So preview 7, which is actually we're intending on shipping next week, is going to be a go live release. So we had an idea. We have this website, .net.microsoft.com. It actually gets a tremendous amount of traffic. Wouldn't it be a good thing if we moved it to preview 7 ahead of the release, and then we would be able to tell people, like, look, we're not just telling you that we think that preview 7 is a good idea for hosting in prod. We've already done it. So so we not only did we update the website to move it to preview 7, we updated the header to put this little powered by thing in there. So that uses some new APIs that we added in the product, or actually we fixed APIs that were already in the product. So Emo had the first run at those APIs. He didn't quite hit the bar, so I had to come and fix them for him. And now they produce the right strings.
Yeah.
Everything I just said is true. So this website is running on the latest preview 7 build.
Yes. I think I know which API you're talking about.
Yeah, this is the
Does it return 4.5 for .NET Core?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, .NET Core.
This is the runtime information framework description API or something like that.
I can actually explain why it returns that weird string, and it makes me
although if you actually go to the tweet and then go to I have a reply to myself, you can actually click there, and then it's this line 15. That's where that version is coming from.
So did we fix the actual API to return no longer 4.5?
Yes. So this is all producing the right content in .NET Core 3.0. We fix it in Preview 4 or Preview 5, and then you can actually get hashes and version numbers for all of our assemblies too. That's what that other scheme is doing.
Man, like this code is tasty.
Yeah, well, it's all the one-liner stuff. It's subject to
shaming.
Yeah, it's subject to shaming and to null reference exceptions.
Yeah.
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 Another team actually told me, oh yeah, because they have Bing has a similar experience as this. And they're like, oh yeah, we used your code to build this experience. It's like, oh, I hope you changed it.
Great.
Well, they probably pull from your gist, right?
yeah, pulled directly.
Yeah.
All right, so then this is that. Like, Rich, do you want to talk about your stuff, or do you want to talk about Phil's stuff?
Let's go to Phil's.
All right. Well, you mentioned null reference exceptions, so that's a good segue. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
No.
All right.
No,
so
we're that good.
Yeah. So who here likes nulls?
No, they suck.
No, well, I actually like nulls. I do like nulls in the right place.
Exactly.
Well,
Just not in the wrong place. When it's in the wrong place, I hate nulls. Yeah.
Well, so null is fine.
Are you trying to be a rock star here?
Null is a bottom type.
Let's fight with
Oh, is that like bottom feeder? Is that what you mean by that?
No, it's a bottom type, like from type theory, and it's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with null as a bottom
broken
type.
to jail. Good job.
The problem is every reference type in .NET is implicitly a union, right? It's implicitly a sum type of either the reference type or null. You get no help. So that's the thing that sucks.
Yeah, you can say thank you, Tony Hoare.
Yeah,
Fucking
thank you.
it up for all of us.
So, as many people are likely aware, with C#8, we're trying to fix some of that as soundly as possible without making a breaking change in the language. And we've created a lot of work for everybody else at Microsoft as a result. No. So the main things when it comes to C#8. So C#8 is feature complete now for .NET Core 3.0, meaning that barring some extreme usability problems, if they exist, or just bugs in general between now and release, what you get with the Preview 7 stuff that's going to come out.
Oh yeah.
What are you trying to do?
Nothing useful.
Okay. So what you get...
Put you front and center, Philip.
Yeah, what you get with Preview 7 is what you get at release. If there's a bug, we'll try to fix that between then and the actual release. If we get overwhelming feedback saying that something is absolutely horrible to use or something like that, we'll consider a tweak to a design or something like that. But by and large, what's going to ship this month is feature complete for C#8. And that includes nulls, nullability, or nullable reference types, or non-nullable reference types, depending on how you look at it. I like to call it nullability because that's the fancier term, but that's about distinguishing null from the other thing when it comes to a reference type. So with that, there's a few additional things. So that implies compiler analysis that the compiler actually does on your code. And there are some quirks to that you can influence if you have more complicated code, right? Like it's simple enough if string, like if it just analyzes a string input and like you put a question mark on it and you're not, you're dotting into it before you do a null check, that's fine. But if you're doing things like writing highly generic code, especially as a library author, things can get a little bit trickier. So what we have done in collaboration with the compiler and CoreFX is we've released some attributes that are a part of CoreFX itself. And these attributes allow you to sort of influence the analysis of the compiler. So this oftentimes comes when you're doing generics, because just the generic T is actually a very interesting corner case in the design of this feature, because T question mark already has meaning today. That is a nullable struct. When you say T question mark, a nullable, like generic over or nullable struct or nullable type. So like we can't just co-opt that syntax and say that it means something else, because that could very well be a breaking change. Like there's all these weird little things, but like you may have something that is generic over a T, but you want to intend the input type to either allow nulls or disallow nulls, depending on what you want to do. And so, but you can't like put a thing on the T that tells that like informs the rest of the method. That
so why is that though? Because I would have thought that it wasn't a breaking change from the perspective that T question mark only applied to value types in the past, and these are reference types, so they're separate.
What if we just throw that compiler at existing code that has those value types? Like there's just some slightly different things. Like we're dealing with, okay, T question mark means a specific type of value type, a specific kind of value type.
Yeah,
but now we're saying, oh, it means something else now.
And the completely open generic, where it could be either value type or a reference type, is one of the areas that a lot of work has gone into. That's one of the tricky spots.
So because T could be a reference type or a value type. So if you say T question mark today, that only means value type. But if you now say, oh, this also means reference type too.
I see.
Yeah. So like there's little tricks that might be able to be employed to make that just work, but it's highly difficult and like just confusing. And so we're like, okay, well, like we can can try to figure out a way to make this work and never ship the feature. But so we are going to ship it. So instead, say you're a library author and you have generic code, but you want it to be, you want nullability to be incorporated in it. Well, you can attach some attributes to like input parameters, for example. You can say, okay, well, I have a method that is parameterized of type T, and it takes in a T input. But I want that T to mean something. I want it to like say, oh, this is a nullable T, or this is a non-nullable T. You can apply an attribute. One is called allow null, the other is called disallow null on that parameter itself. And then that tells the compiler that, okay, this input T is a specific, has like a nullability dimension applied to it, basically. So this is really helpful for library authors. And so we think that this is going to be used a lot by people creating NuGet packages, and they want to incorporate nullability or non-nullability into their types. So that's preconditions, but then you also want to have post-conditions, right? Because there's no way to associate some arbitrary function result or method result with the nullability state of something else. That's like that's getting into dependent typing, which is really crazy. That sort of involves like a proof system and a compiler to be able to do this sort of stuff. But that is sort of useful to be like, well, if this thing, say it returns true, or it returns something like how can I sort of say like what this thing does tells me about some nullability state. Like if I do an if check on something, like say instead of doing A is null, right? What if I had a method that determined the nullability of A as a result of doing something else and it returned a bool, right? There's no way for the compiler to like know that. Just input, or like it could in like a trivial case, but that could like call into another thing and then another thing and another thing, and you could have like this infinite chain of function calls that could somehow influence the result of that method. And then you would presumably want the compiler to check all of that. Well, it can't, because you would just get exploding compile times. So instead, you can enforce a post condition on the return type of something, and you can say it is either a maybe null or a not null. So you say like, okay, well, the results, the result is non-nullable in this case. So then the compiler can say, okay, well, I'm going to assume that this is non-nullable because you have declared this thing that I'm dealing with as such. If it actually fails, that's like your fault for not, annotating it like that. But we want to give people the tools to do that. A lot of this grew out of needs by CoreFX developers themselves to be able to apply nullability or non-nullability on particular parts of the core part of CoreFX.
So one aspect of what you're talking about is, there's many aspects of it, but one aspect of it is that there's work going on that is going to allow some of the surface areas that Microsoft has in CoreFX to understand nullability actually out of the gate when nullability is first available to customers, and so, or users, whatever. But so if somebody is putting nullability into their code and their code is calling things in CoreFX, and at least some cases, because it's a lot of work and I don't know where we're at in the process, then they're going to be able to have the nullable nature of what they're calling in CoreFX will be expressed into their code, so their code can understand that as it does the flow analysis in their code. And so, in addition, if you're a library author, then you can buy into the same system and make sure that you're fully annotated in a way that somebody using your library has that same joy. But nullability is such a journey. This is like, we're starting on a really good journey here, but it's a journey.
So then there's also some additional attributes. They're called conditional post conditions. Right? So this is helpful, say like in try parse, right? You want to try parse out a value, and if it's successful, you want the thing that it was parsed into to be either nullable or non-nullable. Right?
I see. So this is conditional on the bool.
Yeah, conditional on the bool, right? So again, if the compiler had to track that like magically, that's totally getting into like proof system level stuff in the compiler, and you could just have You could like maybe embed like a Z3 solver inside the compiler. Maybe it could work. I don't know, but like that's getting a little crazy. So instead,
and not in nullability. Nothing in nullability is guaranteed 100%. No. It's all like really, really good, but so you would wind up with absolutely fall over cases if you tried to do what you at a proof level.
Yeah, and so this whole thing of like I have this method that returns a bool, but it takes in a ref parameter, and I want to influence the nullability state of that ref that was passed in based off of the result of the method. That's something that you can apply via metadata, and that's a super common pattern throughout CoreFX. It's also just a common pattern in general.
Can I clarify one more thing there for folks? Is that that's a great example, but that's because flow analysis can sometimes figure out whether or not that you're going to get a return bool, and then your code will reflect that. So you're going to have an if, for example, that uses that bool, and so inside that block, then the nullability analysis can understand nullability of that because we assume you're going to use an if there, and that's the context of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I mean, like the typical pattern that people have is if they call try-get or try-parse or something like that, if it succeeds, they have the thing. Yeah. Right, and so in people's code today, they're just typing dot immediately into the thing, and so that's actually true. Like if it succeeded, we don't have null as a result; we have an actual thing as a result. But there was no way for the compiler to distinguish that, so without making an assumption. So if you apply, if you sort of, I guess you could say. I forgot the word, but if you can effectively encode an assumption that the compiler could say, aha, well, I know this to be true. It has been asserted as true, so therefore I'm going to assume that is correct.
Codify, is that what you're looking for?
It's sort of not like proof. So like you're not actually proving that it is true that try-parse gave you a non-nullable thing. It's like proof by assertion, if you will. Like I'm asserting that this is correct.
I think another way of thinking of it, there's a contract in place here for that API. Like if the bool is true and the thing is the out value is null, then the contract has been broken.
Right. In this case, like try-parse is somewhat of a bad example because most of our try-parse APIs return value types. But like basically, if they would return a class type, that would be the example where we would say, be guaranteed that it's never null when it's returning true. For this particular case here, the dictionary, it's even more complicated because it's generics. So t-value is not constrained to be anything particular, right? It could be a value type, it could be a class type. And so in this case, we're saying if the method returns false, t-value may be null. So we are not actually guaranteeing that it's not null when it's returning true, because it's totally valid to have null values in a dictionary. But we are saying that it might be null when the return value is false. We're basically saying if, basically in the negated part of the if, it's probably an error, right? Versus if it's a generic, well, if it's constrained to be value type, then, it doesn't matter.
In the calling code, and that's kind of the part of the point of this particular feature, is that in the calling code, you may know T to be nullable or not nullable.
Right.
And so if for a reference type even, then it's this flow at certain places. It doesn't flow all the way through your application. It'd be way too slow, doesn't do that. Right. But within these scopes, and this is a scope where the calling code to that method may know nullability and may be ready to, and this supports that not losing the information that it has about nullability before it comes to this. And I think that for some of this, that's a way to think about it, is it's designed so that if the calling code understood nullability, that you pass that on, because at the end of the day, the whole nullability feature is about expressing your intent around nullability and having the system help you get it right. That's it. That's the story. And so you have to help express that, and then the system will make some assumptions. But you help express that, and then the system says, "I think you messed up right there," and and this keeps from losing information.
So then the last one.
Can I just say one tiny thing about what Kathleen said? And when you said it would be slow, it would be the compiler that was slow as opposed to the resulting application.
Yes, it's absolutely true. If it tried to do it would be prohibitively, crazily slow.
For the
compiler, if it looked at your entire application, because all of nullability is a compiler thing. It's trying to help your runtime never get to the code that would have caused you a problem before.
Another way to think about this is like if you think of your program as a graph of method calls, right?
Yeah.
What the type system gives you and the annotations that the type system gives you is that you only have to look at every single edge once, right? Like a nullability within a method body, the compiler will do flow analysis and will understand you already checked for null. So it can do a bunch of magic stuff, but it's just within one method. Because everything it calls and everything that it returns, you are expected as the API author to encode the result in your API. So the compiler doesn't actually have to look into the calling method's body to understand what's going on, because that method annotated for its return types and its parameter types what the expected contract is, right? And that's why compilers have type systems, right? So we can actually express things statically, so we don't have to analyze the entire world every single time you make a change.
And the only thing I'd add to that is within your code that's already in the compiler that it's already working with, it does keep some of that information, so you don't like have to annotate your own stuff in order to get anything out of this.
Yes.
It is smart about the code that's actually in the active compilation right now, but actually as soon as you leave that compilation, then you absolutely have to, as you say, just touch that when you need it.
Yeah, a good example is if you declare a variable as nullable, right? And then you write if variable is not null body, you don't want to declare a new variable that is not nullable. You expect the compiler to know, I just checked for null.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you should know that it's not
null.
null.
I know it's not null there.
Yeah.
So the last one is about nullness dependence. We have this thing called nullness dependence between inputs and outputs. So the output of a method, you may want the nullability state of that to be influenced by the nullability state of one of its inputs, right? So like if you want the output to be nullable if the input is nullable, we have this attribute called not null if not null, and it takes in a string, which is the name of the parameter, and that basically says, okay, well, if this input parameter name is non-null, then I want the output of this method to be non-null.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that was influenced by some patterns that were in CoreFX. It's likely to come up for library authors as well. So there's sort of this grab bag of preconditions and postconditions and nullness dependence on different things that are likely to be heavily used by library authors, especially if they're doing complex stuff like how things happen in CoreFX.
So meta question, all of this seems novel to me in the sense that it's like kind of niche and to a large degree in the weeds. Is it actually? Like, is there prior art from other languages that do very similar things as this?
Oh, absolutely. C# is 100% not the first one to do anything like this at all. There are many languages out there that just simply disallow nulls in a variety of contexts.
Well, that's, I think, not the question I'm asking. So what I'm saying is this level of description, basically what's on the screen right there.
Oh, that.
Like this is kind of this idea, like we only need to do all of these crazy things because we're doing it post hoc.
Well, we're doing it post hoc and because .NET is super complicated.
Yeah.
So TypeScript also does it post hoc. So TypeScript is one of the sources of inspiration for the .NET, for the C# way of doing nullables. Some of this stuff that you're looking at right now may not have, I don't know one way or the other whether it has prior art, but it is fairly unique to the details of it were certainly worked out for specific .NET scenarios. The details of it were not available. Whether someone's actually set similar something like an attribute on some other system that was a post hoc nullability kind of thing.
JetBrains has annotations for ReSharper, I believe, and certainly if you're using Rider, you have access to them too. But they're well, it's not that they're limited. Like they're limited, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's limited because like you can only go so far with strictly attributes and saying, oh well, I'm enforcing by convention that this input type cannot be null, and you can apply like tooling on top of that will disallow, like it'll sort of like synthesize a compile error message that you wouldn't get if you just built for the command line. And
how does that relate to code contracts that we used to have?
Well, that's very similar to code contracts in that regard.
Yeah. That's
however, that's not like that. That doesn't allow for just some arbitrary nullable input type, can we do compiler analysis on the state of that for the body of a method? Or, can we relate this to, if this is something that is defined on an interface, that implements an interface, are these matching, for example? So
one thing with code contracts is code contract is more generalized. It's basically predicates over your code. which basically means you have a theory improver running as you analyze it with the code contract analyzer, which is a little bit of a very heavy machinery. Yeah. This one is really only about types. So this basically informs the flow notices of the compiler to consider certain things to be null or not null, depending on state. And so the way I think about these attributes is that they are basically the long tail, right? So like if you're a class library author, you get a lot of mileage out of just using question marks and opting into nullability. And when there are particular patterns where you want to give your users a better experience, that's when you would use those attributes, right? So, we have these attributes. I think we applied something on the order of maybe 50 to 100 across all of CoreLib, which is about 20,000 APIs. So that gives you an idea on how much you would use them. What?
Switch the screen again. This has been on too long.
Sorry, I just want to talk about this.
Oh, okay.
So basically, if you look at these attributes here, they are effectively ignoring suppress message and exclude code coverage. These are basically the long tail things that Philip is talking about, and they are very, very specialized to very particular things. So a good example here is we have this one thing called does not return and does not return if. So for example, if you write debug.assert and you're asserting something is not null, then basically you want to let the compiler be aware of that. And the way you do it is, we basically just we basically put attribute on debug assert and says this method will not return if the condition is false. So that's the compiler reason about the fact if you do the null check in debug.assert that the next line will never execute if that is violated, right? Or we have does not return, which is when you say, if this is null, environment.failfast. So we annotated failfast to say this will never return. If you call this method, this is the end of it, or process.exit, or some things like that, right? So those are, most of the time, the only person using those attributes will be the framework. So that's not something that we expect everybody to use. So it will be I think not like as complicated as it may seem.
So maybe you should talk about how far we got, because Kathleen was kind of touching on that, but it was never answered.
Yeah. Oh well. Before that, I just want to. I just want to say one more thing.
And somebody wants to know who you are.
It was that the guy that was
Philip Carter. Somebody in the question asked who you were, so you might just.
My name is Philip Carter.
Is that Kelvin? Is that the person you were referring to?
Maybe, or he was referring to you. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, definitely everyone knows who email is.
Philip was talking when.
Okay. So we are ramping up with that on the compiler. Now that doesn't mean that we're done. So this feature is more of like a 5-year feature in that regard. Like, I don't think this is not something that like when 3.0 ships were finished. Like there's going to be more bugs. There's going to be opportunities for better compiler analysis. One of the big areas right now is tooling is still very much work in progress with respect to nullability. That's just this added dimension on the type system, and that just percolates everywhere. And one of the areas that there's going to be a lot of improvement is in CoreFX, because right now CoreFX is being annotated with nullable and all the different attributes, the metadata attributes. But there's going to be more of that, because what we're shipping with in .NET Core 3.0 is not all of the CoreFX API surface area fully annotated. We're shipping with about 20% of it or so, or what's called the core lib. So like all the most important like base types are there, but there's a whole lot more that needs to be fully annotated, and that's something that Imo could probably talk about a bit more.
Yeah, and then I want to get back to how we approached it as well, because I think it gives people some ideas of what to do with nullable.
So one thing that, as Philip said, like always sounds depressing when you say it's a 5-year journey, but like if you look at generics, for example, we shipped generics in 2005, and then 2008 was when we shipped Link, right? So many are on extension methods. So some of the key things that make this whole feature gel really well and make it super productive, right? I think nullability will be very, very similar in the sense that if it just works, it saves you a couple of seconds here and there, and they all add up to something that makes you more productive. But in order for us to get there, basically everything has to be annotated. And the way we did it in CoreFX was we looked at various strategies. One strategy that we considered was saying, before we implement it ourselves, because that's a lot of work for us, maybe we should just annotate our reference assemblies, because that immediately gives customers value by just using our API. Whether we adopted nullable or not is orthogonal. The problem with that approach is that you have to be very careful that you don't accidentally lie, because you can only provide the right guarantees if you actually know yourself what's null and what's not null. And so we said, okay, maybe we should just start with CoreLib implementation-wise, annotate the entirety of our core library, and then once we have that, effectively round-trip those things into the reference assembly. And when we did that, I mean, we spent like, I think, I want to say on the order of 20 hours reviewing those changes. And normally you would think you only review the delta, but you have to look at every single API, because now every API that is not annotated is meant to be not null. And in the review, which you can watch on YouTube if you're bored at some point, you will see that we are also surprised ourselves what APIs return null under what circumstances, right? So given that this is the first time where the APIs themselves tell you what is null and not null, that's also the first time you can see this in context, right? If you look at every API in isolation, yeah, it's a fine contract to have to return null when certain things are not true or whatever. But when you actually look at the overall shape, you see all the inconsistencies you have. And so I think from our point of view, like, it was the right approach to go from the inside out. And for .NET 5, we will basically do the rest of the core platform, if you will, or the BCL, which is on the order of like another 50,000 APIs. And then I think from there on, you can expect higher level frameworks like WinForms, WPF, ASP.NET to annotate their stuff, right? But it doesn't really make sense for them to start now, given that the rest of the framework isn't annotated.
Yeah, and there's also another interesting thing with respect to annotations is once they're in, either changing an annotation one way or the other is a breaking change.
But we'll do it.
Or rather, it has the potential to be a breaking change. Now, breaking change meaning in terms of warning, not necessarily an error. Now, that will be an error if people have warn as error set to true. But so like that's why this is happening at the base level, and we're trying to get it out there, and we're trying to we're trying to make sure that our design decisions that we make are correct. Because if we go in and change one of these things, say we decided to change the nullability annotations on object 3 years from now, that's going to be kind of bad, and we don't want to do that. So we want to ship it now, get a lot of feedback on this, and make sure that the warnings that you are getting are the correct warnings. Like, you would expect to get these because, oh, my code, it actually is unsafe in this way. Thank you very much for reminding me this. Or, oh, it makes sense that I should pass something that is non-null here rather than something that could be null. Or the other way, it makes sense that I should be able to pass something that could be null here. And it makes sense that I should be getting something out that could be null or should be non-null. And
Can you talk a little bit about the gray area? Because I think people that are new to the feature think it's a binary thing and you just have to get it right. So why is there any gray area? Like, either it's null or it's not null. Like, how can you make mistakes there?
Oh, well, you can. It's about the design of something, right? Like, should toString, just the base toString itself, should that be a nullable string or a non-nullable string that it gives you back?
So why can you talk why both options make sense?
Right, both options could make sense. Well, you could define toString on something. I mean, I could arbitrarily write some code that overrides toString and could give you back a null. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that code today. Like, it might be dumb code, but like, it exists. And presumably I would like that code to keep working, and I wouldn't want to have to modify that and like contrive a value in the case where I wanted to return null.
And it's also not violating the existing contract of toString in any way.
Yeah. Whereas it is also, in a way, you could think of it, well, maybe toString should be non-nullable because you want a string, you don't want null. And like, this is so, I don't know if any option is particularly right so much as there's just a design decision there and sort of how it feels with people.
Right, although it's mostly due to the post hoc nature. Meaning if we were starting from scratch,
we would probably make it string. But then that begs the question, if we would probably do that, then maybe it's a better design decision to actually do that. We don't really know yet because we haven't shipped it, so we don't know, like, with the bulk of people using this, if that's actually the right call yet.
Yeah, so I have a more out of the weeds conversation, which is I understand that like interfaces and virtual methods of all kinds definitely bring complexity to that's basically what you guys were talking about. So in the case where I have my app, I'm only thinking about my own implementation. It has no virtual methods in it. They're just all concrete in nature. Mm-hmm. And I sprinkle all these attributes around. What does testing that look like in order for me to know that I attributed these correctly? Is it the case that the compiler won't compile my code if I wrote the wrong things? Meaning, say there's actually a null that can escape out of this method, or is there some sort of testing that I have to do to validate that what I did was correct?
Well, so since it's all warnings based, if you say you have like existing test code or something, and you're just trying to sprinkle a little bit of nullable in there, but you don't want to change everything right now, you can suppress nullability warnings at different scopes. And so you could say, okay, well, because ultimately it's just warnings. You could choose to ignore them all, and everything builds and runs and executes just as it normally would.
Sure, that's not really, so that makes sense. That's not really where I was headed though, which is, let's assume I have all the warnings enabled because I'm trying to get to purity, like to correctness with respect to this. How do I know that the attributions that I put there are correct?
Yeah, I can kind of answer that. So like on the CoreFX side, we have done no testing specifically for nullable. So what we have done is we basically said, well, we turned on in the code, and then we basically drove the warnings to 0, not by suppressing, but by fixing the code.
Exactly.
And so the idea is once you get to 0 warnings, the idea is that your APIs are annotated to correctly represent the state of nullability. Now, the question now is, the test is, do you like those? Do you like that your API returns string ? Or string, right? That's not so much a test. It's more like, okay, your code is annotated so the compiler thinks that the flow-wise is sound, but do you like the resulting annotation?
I guess it's somewhat similar to like saying, oh, how do I test that this thing that says it takes in a string only accepts strings? So like if I define a method that takes in a string, do I want to test that, oh, if I pass in an integer, it rejects it?
Right, so we don't write tests like that.
Right, so we don't write tests like that because it's part of the type system. I like to think as nullability as an extra dimension on the type system itself.
Yeah, so that is where I was headed.
Yeah, so like there's sort of, think of it as like an additional step in type checking. So like we want to check that these things are compatible, but then there's now an additional layer of compatibility.
Right, so
that's the nullable compatibility.
So I don't need to write unit tests that relate to nullability.
No, only if you feel like it.
Yes. So the answer that Emo gave was good. Like that was where I was wanting to go, which is, so at any point in time, if you have these attributes, they will be correct. Like the compiler will enforce them to be correct. But there's this editorial nature to them, which is you have to decide if you're happy with what it is that they represent.
And there's one additional wrinkle, like similar to the type system, you can cast, right? You can cast, string to object and object to string, right? And, going from string to object is fine. Going from object to string may not be fine, right? You may get a runtime casting error. The same is true for null, right? We have this bang operator now that basically tells the compiler to say, the compiler thinks this might be null, but you're saying, shut up.
You're like, I know better.
You're overwriting this.
This is the damn it one, right?
It's the damn it operator.
The damn it operator.
And so the idea there is, if you sprinkle those aggressively through your code base, then you basically tell the compiler, I know better. And then the question is, how would you find that out? And the answer to that is you run the code, right? That's the normal state of life, similar to how would you find invalid cast exceptions where you have to run the code.
Although let me make sure we're really clear on something with what you just said, which is you need to run the code. You need to run the code with the bad values because there is nothing in nullability that affects runtime in the discussion. It doesn't. And so this is all compiler based, which means that you have to have a test that's going to pass in a value and then you're going to blow up. You're going to have to create the situation that nullability was designed to keep you out of in order to be able to run the code and see. So it's actually a pretty high bar to hit that in a realistic way. It's actually going to be really hard for people to know if they've annotated correctly.
I'm hearing different responses from
I don't know if it's hard so much as it's not any more difficult than knowing if the system that you are writing is doing the right thing anyways. Like there's the right thing from like a unit test standpoint if you're just like, say you're, I don't know, building a Windows application or something. Then there's also the right thing of like, okay, well, am I displaying like the right information for users? It's very similar to that. Like, are the contracts that I'm defining in between my system, do they make sense in the context of how the system needs to evolve?
Yeah, right. I was commenting, that's true. I completely agree with you. It becomes a little bit more touchy when you start putting the operator that I can't remember the name of, so I'll call it, damn it, because I can't remember. We've named it something better than that.
Null suppression operator, I think.
Yeah, null suppression operator. So if you put the exclamation point in, then you're getting to a situation where it will be harder to see whether you're giving the person the right information. So I would definitely suggest that if you're using this null suppression operator, the exclamation point much, either there's something in the process that you haven't become one with, that you haven't got the whole, it's not quite working smoothly yet, and that's either you haven't become part of the Borg or the Borg isn't right for you just yet, and we need feedback on that.
So, well, I think I would slightly disagree on that, because I think I would say that it's almost saying it's a code smell, but I wouldn't go that far. It's the same as you would say if you move from JavaScript to, let's say, C#, but you move from basically no typing to typing, that any sort of casting is a bad smell, right? I think that's not true. The reality is that type systems can only represent what the compiler can statically know, and that is not to say that there's more things you could statically know. Like there are, but the compiler just says I'm not going to be a theory improver, so I will not, for example, track how these 4 variables in conjunction work, right? Combinatorics of variables, for example, right? So there will be cases where the compiler just can't know that certain things are not null, even though that's true. And so that's where the bang-in operator or the casting comes in, where you say, no, I know that this thing will always be a string, or this will always be a null value, right? And so that's where you basically override this. So in fact, in CoreFX, I think we at some point counted the number of bangs, and it's significant. We have it all over the place. But also keep in mind that our code is also not 100% representative for what customers write, right? We have things like interlocked compare exchange, where it's really hard to figure out how you would even annotate the API correctly for all cases. But I think for the most part, I would just honestly say, think of it as like casting. Like if you cast from into object, that's basically from object, that's kind of how bang it works. It's not always bad, but you're basically saying, I know better. And well, as it is with all of these things, you have to test that. And but I would say, I don't think it's bad, because even if it goes bad, it's not worse than today's world, right? You may get a null reference exception or an argument not exception at runtime. So
how about I want to ask
react to that.
I want to ask my question again, and all three of you,
maybe we can answer it.
All three of you can give your own answer, because I think this is a super important question, which is, if you go do this to your code and you opt into this feature and scenario, do you need to write new unit tests for your app/library?
Nope.
I would not.
I'm going to say no too. I mean, I'm going to say no. Nobody has shown that yet. I'm not saying no one would ever show it.
Yeah, it's not necessary.
But I mean, your extra unit tests would literally have to be picking up warnings to see whether they were happening in certain places. Because
that's not what I meant. So not whether warnings are occurring, but like in the presence of the dammit operator, does obviously you're doing more human computation to ensure that this is safe, and the question is whether you need to write unit tests to guard against something like that.
So I guess
the question is more like imagine you don't have any nullable annotations, which is today's world, right? Do you have unit tests to test whether you return null or whether you accept null? You might. I mean, some really, people that are obsessed with the APIs will write those unit tests. Most people don't, right? They just write the behavior tests, I guess. If you move to nullability, it just means that instead of having to write tests, you might get warnings earlier. However, even if you use nullable annotations, that does not remove the need for you to check and throw exceptions, because you might have callers that don't have annotations enabled, right? So you always have to, even if you say I only accept non-null strings, a caller that doesn't use nullable annotations might still give you a null value.
Yeah, I guess maybe a different way of saying it is, so your unit tests should be the same as they always were, because they test the domain of your software.
Right.
And this is just another tool to help reduce a certain class of bugs.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it, and that might be wrong, but I don't think of this nullable feature as removing bugs. I think of it more as a productivity feature that the developer who writes code against your API the first time knows what your behavior is and knows what your expectations are, right? And so instead of me passing in values and then later on fail with a null reference, add an if statement somewhere, because for the most part, I mean, you look at CoreFX, for example, by us adding nullable annotations, we found like 5 bugs in like a code base of like, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands lines of code, right? So,
but that's heavily tested.
That's heavily tested, and like so if you enable it on existing code bases, the value is not going to be you finding more bugs. The value is mostly for your consumers having a better first-time experience, knowing what is null. Because some APIs are surprising. So let me give you an example. Path.getParent directory will return null if there's no parent directory. Most people never check for null for this case. And so that's an example where the first time you use it, it's like, I did, and I never thought about that. And I guess I always got lucky, right? So you never had a path where you hit this, right? And so this is one of the examples where it just gives you some sort of like productivity gain by knowing upfront what your expectations are. And sometimes you find bugs, but if your code is existent, you probably found all the normal common bug cases, right? So even the CoreFX ones, the 5 we found, we're not even sure they are possible. Like there are some state violations internally, but we think that most of them are unreachable because of other constraints.
Right, but that's CoreFX, which has a really high bar for a lot of the way it's written. If you have code that has no asserts in it and it has got it just runs, it just works. You had a lot of focus on happy path. You haven't done a lot with boundary conditions in your unit tests. Yeah, I think you're going to find a lot of bugs. I think actually it's going to be a frustrating experience because of how many bugs you get. But that's what I was going to say earlier about picking corelib is that pick the most core thing you've got, the most central piece, the utility. If you have a utility library, start there. Because picking corelib was not an accident, and we didn't pull it out of a hat. It was what is that most central thing, and then you kind of concentric circles out from there. Right. What is calling that makes sense to do? You said you were looking at the BCL as being the next step, another 50,000 APIs. And then after that, looking at WinForms or ASP.NET. And so that same process of this is the most central thing, this is the next thing, this is the next thing. Absolutely. That's the way to approach this, both for maximum benefit and also for maximum sanity, because your utility library, man, if it has a potential null reference, you want to catch it and you want to catch it today. I mean, that you want. Out in WinForms someplace, you may have a spot where it comes up with a recommendation to treat something as nullable, and you go, that can't possibly be null. I know that from what I know about the code. And it's a different experience than it is at the very heart of your applications.
So I'd like to end this nullable discussion.
We could go on forever, couldn't we?
I know. I'd like to end it on something great. Earlier, I said that these attributes sort of imply a proof by assertion within the compiler. So I decided to pull up the Wikipedia article on proof by assertion. Proof by assertion, sometimes informally referred to as proof by repeated assertion, is an informal fallacy in which a proposition is repeatedly restated regardless of contradiction. This fallacy is sometimes used as a form of rhetoric by politicians or during a debate as a filibuster. In its extreme form, it can also be a form of brainwashing.
So how does that have to do with nullable?
Well, it's just because he used that term.
I declared that some of these attributes are, in a way, a proof by assertion.
So you're backing off of that.
We're not actually proving the correctness.
So it's just a little bit like
asserting that it's correct.
Was it gaslighting?
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
So I found that to be
and that is
tickling.
That is your version of a positive ending.
Yeah. It was tickling in a way. So I decided to bring it up. It tickled me.
I don't know how relevant that.
Now you know what working with Philip is like.
We can be fun to work with.
On that note, today I aged by 5 years again. I was sitting in the cafeteria peacefully drinking my coffee, watching a YouTube video about PBS space-time, and all of a sudden this joker jumps in front of me, yells out of his lungs, and I'm like,
okay.
And 5 people turned around in the cafeteria. I think I aged, and so did other 5 people.
That's great.
So I just want to end on one note, which is so we in the middle we talked about how the website is moving to Preview 7. Did move to Preview 7, so we're planning on shipping that next week. Some people have been asking me like, what features are you still planning on shipping? Definitely wanting to send the message that very few new features are coming in .NET Core 3. We're absolutely trying to shut down the release, bring it up to quality, and make it so that you can ship it on your production servers and then start building, Windows Forms and WPF, Windows desktop apps. So we're getting ready to be done and moving on to the next release, which we're super happy about. So we'll soon be working on 3.1.
And then 5.0, because 3.1 is short.
Yeah, 3.1 is super short. I mean, I guess I can talk about that a tiny bit, which is our goal with 3.1 is that it will be the LTS release, so supported for a much longer period. We are going to have an extremely high bar for accepting changes to that. So obviously, we'll be taking all the bug fixes from 3.0 that we've done in that short period of time. There'll be a small set of features. We're going through a review process on those, but there'll be a very high bar for those, and then the team will move 100% to 5.0.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions we want to tie up with? Or?
I don't think there's not much more. You
Not much
answered
more,
all the ones
okay.
on YouTube, and I think those ones here we also
A book recommendation on type theory. Do you have anything?
What is it? Types in programming languages? I think that's the name of the book.
Is that the right one?
Types. Yeah, TAPL. Yeah, Types in Programming Language by Benjamin Pierce. That's the name of the book. It is. If you're interested in it, it's pretty great. It will teach you from the very get-go. It will define, from the basics, what is a judgment, right? How do you get into the vernacular of describing the relationships between types themselves? And
what kind of a background do you think you need to have in order for you to follow the content?
So mathematical or computer science for sure. Also, an English background might actually be quite good, because if you studied English and you studied things like grammars and the structure of languages, this is extremely relevant.
Okay.
There's a mathy sort of twist to it, because once you start getting into defining the relationships between things, like in a categorical sort of thing or a category theory, as it were, that's when you start getting into now like this, there's like this abstract structure of this thing called a language, but it has very definite rules in it. What? You don't like that?
Yeah. 650 pages, so it's
It'll
just a light weekend read.
Yeah, it is not a light weekend read. That's going to take a while to get through that book, but it's a really good one. By the time you're done with it, you can read some abstract notation.
I had a funny conversation with my grandmother one time. She was a school teacher, one-room schoolhouse, and she was married to a farmer, my grandfather. And this is just as I was learning XML. And so I was talking to her about parsing, because parsing is a big part of that thing. And it was funny. She knew exactly what I was talking about, because she said that she parsed grammar quite commonly as an English teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Canada. And so this relates to, that was the one time I was able to have a technical-oriented conversation with my grandmother, and were literally talking about the same thing.
Was she a proponent of the bottom-up or top-down?
And I have a friend who was on the XML Standards Committee who was an English major. So absolutely. Yeah. He went through SGML and the whole thing, and absolutely.
In fact, programming languages are based in large part on the Chomsky grammars, and Noam Chomsky is one of the, he's into politics now, but back in his salad days, he was just a measly English professor at MIT, defining the foundational bases for what programming languages just are in general, and it comes directly from a language theory grammar, sort of, not like programming language theory, but like spoken language, like written language, and
natural language.
Natural language is the
word you're looking for.
Linguist. Yes, he's definitely was a. I don't know. I think you can use the word measly in the same sentence as Noam Chomsky, but he certainly was a amazing linguist.
Yeah.
And, is doing many things with his life.
Yeah, linguistics was one of my favorite courses at university.
Didn't you major in English grade?
Yeah, I did. And that's why I took linguistics.
You should read the TAPL book. You might like it.
Yeah, I probably will. I think I'll go buy that.
Yeah.
Or rent it. That would be another option.
Renting 648 pages. Read fast.
I can rent books on Amazon.
I didn't actually know that either.
It is a little bit dense, but
so what happens if you change the date? Does the rental fee go up?
I don't know. Let's check it out. It does.
Oh wow. Okay,
So let's be a realistic one. How about like?
But it's an ebook you're renting, so.
Oh, I cannot rent until 2020. That's disappointing.
Okay.
So if I give myself until March next year.
Well, no, isn't that January? Where's?
Oh yeah, sorry. I mean,
you're doing that.
Using the German.
You're doing the European thing again. Actually, it's like that in Canada too. Canada's on the
European
Eurocentric.
Yeah, you are basically a European American.
Yeah. I told you that story where I went to the Apple store to buy something, AirPods for my
Apple
wife.
Product?
And I got into this thing that I'm Canadian, and she said, "Isn't that in the European Union?"
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
not quite.
We are running way over though, aren't we?
You just got to, sorry, it's
so we have
not
20
in the
more minutes,
European
right?
Union.
I missed 2 meetings.
This is 2.5 hours long, right? Yeah. No,
I never miss
don't worry,
meetings.
people,
I
we
only
won't
just choose
do-
not to
yeah.
attend them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have to conclude today's stand-up. We are only 40 minutes over. I blame Philip for category theory.
Change the screen.
I didn't really get into category theory.
Don't do it now. It's okay.
Well, thank you for watching. Those who
thanks
stuck
so much.
with us.
Yeah, we've had a good time here. Hopefully, you've had fun, and we look forward to seeing you next month. We missed last month, so we didn't we?
Well,
Just me?
we didn't miss it. We deliberately skipped it for technical reasons.
Right. Okay.
I forgot what it was.
So hopefully
What
we'll
were
be
they?
here next month. Look forward to it.
Sounds good.
We'll be back.
All right, we sign off. Enjoy the rest of your day, and if you have spare time, port to .NET Standard 2.0.
You betcha.